Hey guys, so I recently asked you on my YouTube community tab if you had any video requests, and a couple of people requested to hear about some of my favorite makeup tips that I've learned. And I feel like I actually have a lot of makeup tips that I use every single day that have completely changed the game for me, that I don't necessarily talk about a whole lot in videos, but I think it's fun to talk about not just makeup products, but also makeup techniques that we love. So before we get into it, I do want to put out just a brief disclaimer. I mean, I know most people don't need to hear this, but I do just want to say these are all just tips that work well for me. Just because something works well for me, the opposite may work for you, and that's the beauty of makeup. I would love to hear about your makeup techniques that you love down below in the comments as well. Some of these might not work for you, but they have totally changed the game for me, and I think they might change the game for a lot of people. So let's go ahead and get into my top 7-ish makeup tips that have changed my life, not being dramatic. So my first tip slash thing that I've learned over the years is that it's really not necessary to use all dewy base products in the same routine or all matte base products in the same routine. So me, for example, I have had dry skin for a long time now, for several years at this point, or at least I'll go through periods of time where my skin is very dry and then it'll kind of normalize, but I feel like dry skin is an issue that I deal with a lot. And I used to think that that meant I needed to only opt for hydrating, dewy, luminous products. But I've learned recently that that is not the case. Even as someone with dry skin, I can still rock a matte base look if I want to, if I'm going for that kind of look, and I think that can look really pretty. I also think, by the way, sidebar here, I feel like matte makeup has gotten such a bad rap over the years as our community has kind of headed more in the direction of dewy, glowy, low coverage, skin tints, those kinds of things. Matte, higher coverage makeup automatically gets kind of laughed off as like, that's just not going to look as good or as natural. But maybe you aren't going for a quote-unquote natural makeup look. Like, I mean, I'm not fooling anyone that I have naturally yellow eyelids here. You know, I'm not always going for a natural makeup look, and I think that matte or even satin matte often gets lumped in with like cakey, heavy, makeup-y look, but it doesn't have to be. It can be done really beautifully too. So, side note, if you are someone who likes matte makeup, don't let the craze around dewy scare you from wearing what you like to wear on your skin, because you can wear whatever you want. So, for example, I used to think that I needed to use a glowy SPF, a glowy primer, a glowy foundation, a glowy setting spray. But now I kind of like to mix and match and let matte things and glowy things kind of work together to balance each other out. So, for example, I have some really glowy foundations that I love, but sometimes when these foundations are layered over another glowy primer or sunscreen, it's way too much glow. So an example of that would be the Ilia Super Serum Skin Tint, one of my favorite foundations at the moment. It's just so lightweight and it is very dewy but very breathable. I really enjoy this, but this on top of a glowy or like really hydrating sunscreen, like even this over the Pipette SPF 50 sunscreen, really wouldn't make a whole lot of sense because they're just going to slide around. They're going to slide over each other. These are both two kind of more slippy products, and I don't mean that in a bad way, but they're not the type of product that's going to kind of self-set. So they're just gonna slide around with each other, and it's gonna be a mess on my skin. So what I prefer to do is pair my Ilia skin tint with a matte sunscreen. So like the Unsun Everyday SPF 30, the Paula's Choice Super Light Daily Wrinkle Defense, the Bliss Block Star, those kinds of sunscreens work so well with this kind of foundation because the matteness of the sunscreen kind of helps this stay in place, even though this is a very flexible, slippy type of product. I hope that doesn't make it sound bad, because I feel like slippy might automatically sound like greasy or something. That's not what I mean, but this gives you a very hydrated base, so it kind of needs something matte underneath it to just help it have a place to stay, right? So that's just something I've discovered recently. Don't feel like just because you have dry skin or just because you have oily skin that that's such a part of your identity that you're not able to branch out and maybe try you know, a matte sunscreen layered with a glowy foundation, or a glowy sunscreen layered with a matte foundation could also be beautiful. If you have a foundation in your collection that's maybe too matte, or you want to give it just a little bit of a boost of hydration, try putting a glowy sunscreen underneath. I think that can work really well. Same thing with, like, let's say a glowy foundation, maybe you want to put a mattifying setting spray over that. You can totally do that. Those two together will probably work really well. Even better than if you were to say put matte sunscreen, a matte primer, a matte foundation, a mattifying powder, and then a mattifying setting spray. Unless you have the oiliest of the oily skin, you probably don't need to do all of those mattifying products together in one routine. I think they can each kind of have their place in a routine, but you don't need to use them all together. Just something to think about if you feel like you are, oh, I'm a glowy person, or oh, I'm a matte person. You can be both, or you can even use both together. Okay, so speaking of, a lot of these pertain to your base, and I even have a couple that pertain to skincare, but to me, skincare and makeup are so intertwined. Like, if your skincare routine is not in check, let's say if your skin is very inflamed, maybe your skin barrier is compromised, and so you have a lot of flaky skin, your makeup is then not going to work as well on top of it. So having a good foundation, literal foundation, your actual skin, having your skin really well prepped is going to make such a huge difference for your base, and also just the base products and the techniques you use with your base. That is the literal foundation of the rest of your makeup. So those things I think are some of the most important things to focus on if you want to kind of level up your makeup game. So speaking of your base products, another thing that I've learned, at least for myself, is that primer and sunscreen don't need to be used in conjunction with one another. I like to just pick one or the other. Because what I've found is that, I mean, I wear sunscreen every day, right? So sunscreen is my number one priority. That's going to come first. If I'm going to pick one or the other, it's usually going to be sunscreen. But for me, so both sunscreen and primer underneath my foundation, and oftentimes a moisturizer under that. So 2 to 3 layers of other products before I even apply my foundation. For me, that's just too many layers of things that could potentially interact weirdly with each other. I mean, you're looking at potential pilling, your product balling up. If you're struggling with your foundation kind of pilling on top of your skin, you might want to consider just reducing the number of products you're layering underneath your foundation, because really, you know, the fewer layers, the better everything is going to get along with each other, with your skin. So the other thing that I do worry about a little bit with layering sunscreen and primer is that if you're putting the primer on over your sunscreen should be the last step of your skincare routine. So ideally, you really shouldn't be putting you should never put any kind of moisturizer or serum on over your sunscreen. And the thing is, a lot of primers really are just kind of glorified moisturizers anyway. So if you really want to use a primer, it's probably best to put that underneath your sunscreen. The reason why you don't want to apply moisturizers and things like that over your sunscreen is that it can kind of disrupt that layer. Your sunscreen forms kind of a film over your skin that protects it. So if you're putting something else that's moisturizing on top of it, it's going to kind of break down that layer and create gaps, and you're not going to get the full sun protection. At least that's my understanding. So that is why I avoid applying primers over sunscreen. Now let's say I'm getting ready for a night out and the sun has already gone down. I might just go in with no sunscreen. I might just wash my face so that I have a clean canvas, no sunscreen on, and that would be a time that I would use a primer instead. Like, I do really enjoy the e.l.f. Jelly Pop Dew Primer. This is a great primer, so I'll use this if I don't have sunscreen on underneath, like if I'm getting ready at night. I do really enjoy that, and it helps your makeup kind of last longer, and it keeps it really looking really smooth. So that is an instance where I will use primer, but most days I don't use primer because number one, I don't want it to disrupt my sunscreen. I could put it underneath, but I'm kind of just like, what's the point? I don't want to have all these different layers of products on there. So that's why I really think it's better to just pick one or the other, either SPF or primer. If you can find a primer with SPF, that's even better. Like a lot of, like the Bliss Block Star, the Unsun, the Paula's Choice, those matte tinted mineral sunscreens I mentioned earlier, those actually work similarly to a makeup primer, but those do kind of blur your pores and they're kind of mattifying, so they do work similarly to a face primer, in my opinion, better than a lot of face primers. They help your makeup stay on longer too, so I would recommend just finding either a 2-in-1 or pick one or the other, but if it's the daytime, I hope you're picking sunscreen. So a makeup tip, or kind of a tweak to how I do my makeup recently, very simple tweak, is I've changed up the types of brushes that I use for blush and highlighter. So blush and highlighter are two steps of your makeup routine that can have a tendency to look a little harsh if you're not using the right brushes, and I used to use a really kind of a more dense blush brush that did a good job applying the color, but I felt like it was a little bit too targeted, and so I had to be really careful not to allow it to look like patchy or blotchy. And with highlighter, it's very easy if you're using a smaller highlighter brush. Like this one I used to use, the Real Technique setting brush. And I know a lot of people love it. If you love it, absolutely keep using it. But for me, I realized that with this brush, I was getting too much of kind of a stripe of highlighter. It was almost looking a little bit too thick in one spot there on my cheek. So I switched to a much fluffier highlighter brush. This is the e.l.f. Precision Feather Light Highlighting Brush, quite a mouthful, but they do still sell it, I'm pretty sure. I think it's like $8, which is more expensive than a lot of e.l.f.'s brushes, but it is also one of my favorite e.l.f. brushes I've ever tried, and it feels a little bit more well-made than some of their cheaper brushes. So anyway, this one has a great taper to it, but the bristles are also pretty fluffy and diffused. So it's not a very stiff brush, and this brush wasn't super stiff either. It's just that it's a much smaller brush, and I just find it harder to get the kind of diffused highlighter look that I want with this brush anymore. And you'd be surprised, even with such a diffused brush, you can still get a very strong highlight. Like I still like a strong highlight as long as it's applied well and it's not like a stripe. And today I'm wearing the Aether Beauty highlighter in Pink Diamond Dust, and I still got a pretty strong highlight with it, but I feel like it just looks a lot more, I don't want to say natural, but this brush just allowed me to make it look very blended in with the rest of my cheek look. So if you're unhappy with your highlighter, try a bigger, fluffier brush. I highly recommend this e.l.f. one. And then similarly for blush, this is the blush brush that I've been using, and unfortunately they don't sell this anymore. At least I don't think so. This is the BH Cosmetics V2 brush. A lot of you might have something similar to this in your collection already. I just really like how this brush it's a little bit fluffier than a lot of blush brushes. It's very rounded, it's not pinched in, which I like, because a lot of blush brushes are kind of pinched in at the ferrule to make them a little bit more like this, but I like that this is just completely round. I find that really fun and like easy to use. So yeah, that is my favorite blush brush at the moment, and that is my favorite highlighter brush. Those two brush changes like really changed my life. So my next tip is about eyelid primer, and first things first, I am of the belief that eyelid primer is a must. For me, in my makeup routine, I can't go without it. So I'm not too picky about brands or anything. Like, I've liked most of the eye primers I've tried. The one I'm using right now is the CoverGirl Lid Lockup Primer. Milani makes a good one. I've heard Profusion makes a good one. I do recommend just getting it from the drugstore though. You really don't need to spend high-end prices on these. And they also last forever. A little goes a long way. I really can't recommend an eyelid primer highly enough. If you've never tried one, I really do recommend just giving one a try. Maybe pick up one of the more inexpensive ones. Like I think the Profusion one is probably under $5. Just try it out and see if it makes a difference for you. And the reason why I would never use something like concealer as an eyelid primer is concealer will crease. And I don't want to have to set my entire lid with powder just to keep the concealer from creasing, because, and this is my real tip here for this, what is this, number 4? After you've applied your eyelid primer, I do recommend setting it, but not all of it. So I like to just set from the crease up to the brow bone. And then if I'm doing a look that features a shimmer on my lid, which is most days, I don't set my lid. I leave that part unset, because that little bit of tackiness will help your shimmers to just pop a little bit more. But the reason why it's helpful to set from the crease up is that because eye primers do leave a little bit of a tacky base, I don't like for where I'm applying my matte shades to have a tacky base, because it just makes it a little bit harder to blend your matte colors and they might end up looking a little bit patchy. So what the powder does is it creates just a very smooth, completely dry canvas for your mattes to blend over, versus if you're blending those mattes over a slightly tacky eyelid primer, you can still get them to blend, but it's going to be a little bit harder. So that's a really great tip, especially for beginners. If you're having trouble with your eyeshadows looking patchy, I recommend trying that out. So my tip number 5 goes back to actually a skincare tip, but I'm telling you this this is so important even for makeup. So even if you're not that into skincare, don't click out, because I'm telling you, this is important for you to hear too. And that is the double cleanse method. Truly, double cleansing is one of the tips that completely transformed my entire beauty routine, not just my skincare routine. Double cleansing is where you use an oil-based makeup remover cleanser, either going to be a cleansing balm or a cleansing oil, and which one you use makes a big difference, because some of them really don't rinse off well, and I prefer one that emulsifies and rinses pretty easily. So the two best first cleanses that I've tried are the Fourth Ray Beauty BFD Cleansing Oil, if you want an oil, or the Paula's Choice Omega Plus Cleansing Balm. That one is a little bit pricier, but if you prefer a balm texture, that one is amazing, and it's in a squeeze tube, so it's just so easy to use. And what this does is it completely breaks down all of your makeup, eye makeup, face makeup, everything, and it rinses away with water. So I prefer to use an actual cleansing balm or cleansing oil. I don't like to use just plain, say, jojoba oil or coconut oil, because those don't have any emulsifiers in them, so it's going to be very hard to get those to rinse off of your face with just water, which to me is kind of the whole point of using a cleansing balm. And then you go in with your standard face cleanser. For me, I like to use a non-foaming cream cleanser, like the Paula's Choice Softening Cream Cleanser, but you might like to use a gel cleanser, whatever cleanser you normally use. Then you go in with that, and that just helps to actually cleanse your skin. So the cleansing balm serves to remove that surface layer of makeup and sunscreen, and then the cleanser itself will remove any remaining cleansing balm that's on there, and then it also just cleanses your skin for you. So the reason why that double cleanse method is so worth it to me over something even like a makeup eraser cloth. I used to use those and swear by those before I tried double cleansing, but then once I tried double cleansing, I never went back. Those makeup erasers do work well, but the thing is, they're you're still rubbing at your face with a cloth, and yes, they're soft, but at least if you have sensitive skin, or even if you don't have sensitive skin, it can kind of just mess with your skin barrier unnecessarily, and I just prefer to do as little rubbing and scrubbing of my face skin as possible. So that's why I love double cleansing, and that's why I like to find one that I don't have to go in with a cloth to fully remove it. So double cleansing, I'm sure many of you already do it, but in case you're not doing it yet, I was resistant to it for a long time, but once I started double cleansing, I will never go back. And then my sixth and final tip, this is so important, so listen up. Seriously, cut down on the number of skincare products that you're using, because I have noticed that my skin is healthiest and happiest and the least inflamed, and also I get fewer breakouts when I'm just using fewer products on my face overall. I've just noticed that the more skincare products that I'm rotating between in my skincare routine, the more likely I am for my skin to get irritated, for my skin to break out. My skin might get irritated and then break out because it was irritated. It's so much easier to just have kind of a core set of products that you know work well for your skin, and that way you're not constantly introducing all these new variables that could throw off your skin. And if you don't really have sensitive skin and your skin just doesn't get irritated often, then lucky you. You don't necessarily have to take this advice, but I think everyone could just benefit from fewer products, because at the end of the day, you're also saving money if you're just using fewer products in your routine. So, for example, my skincare routine at night, I double cleanse, and then I will apply my tretinoin, my prescription tretinoin that keeps my acne under control, and then once that sinks in, I apply a moisturizer on top, and that's it. And then I also sometimes use an eye cream. But I'm really not using a whole lot of serums at all, because I just feel like I get everything I need from those products. And then in the morning, I rinse my face. I don't even use a cleanser on it. Then I apply lately, just my moisturizer and my sunscreen. And my skin stays very happy and content when I just use those things. Now, I do have some serums that I like to rotate in from time to time, but so much easier. It takes less time to use fewer products, and I'm just creating less waste, I'm spending less money, and my skin's happier, so why not just do that, you know? Just because there's all this pressure, especially for me, I get so much skincare PR. I get more skincare PR than I do makeup PR. I have no idea why, because you would think it would be the other way around. I don't talk that much about skincare on my channel. Not that I don't appreciate it, it's nice to get free stuff, don't get me wrong, but I get so much skincare PR and so many serums in PR, and I felt so much pressure to use them because I was sent them, and there's all this pressure too to try out so many different skincare products, because that's how skincare companies market to us, but you really don't need that many products in your skincare routine. And like I said, the fewer products that you're layering together, so if you're layering like multiple serums and then a moisturizer and a sunscreen, those have so much potential to maybe pill or irritate your skin, so that's why I just think less is more sometimes. So those are my top 6 makeup and really beauty tips that have totally changed my life. And while they may not work for everybody, hopefully some of you got some ideas for ways to maybe rethink your makeup and beauty routine. But thank you so much for watching today's video. If you enjoyed it, be sure to give it a thumbs up. Subscribe to my channel if you've not already. Also, I'd love to have you over on Patreon, where I do post bonus content each month. But otherwise, I hope you have a great rest of your day, and I will talk to you very soon in my next video. Bye!